If you enjoy wild neighborhood drama, battles with entitled neighbors, and outrageous revenge stories that spiral completely out of control until the very last twist, then you'll love this tale. So before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more stories that will make you laugh, gasp, and maybe even fist pump in triumph. Because what started as a simple hedge-cutting incident with a meddling HOA Karen escalated into the creation of a literal fortress that shook the entire neighborhood, tested friendships, and revealed shocking secrets that nobody could have predicted. And it all began on a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning when I walked out to grab the newspaper only to find my once beautiful green hedges reduced to pathetic stumps, their branches scattered across the lawn like casualties in a war one hadn't realized was being fought. And standing over them with pruning shears in hand was Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, a woman with a permanent scowl carved into her face, a visor she wore like a crown, and a clipboard she clutched as though it gave her divine authority over the rest of us. And when I demanded to know why she had butchered my hedges, she smugly announced that according to HOA landscaping guidelines, my hedges had grown 2 inches taller than regulation height and thus needed to be corrected. Though in reality, I knew she had been itching for an excuse to flex her petty power because she had always hated that my hedges were fuller and greener than the sparse, brittle bushes she struggled to keep alive in front of her house. And though I should have walked away, filed a complaint, and moved on, something inside me snapped that day. Maybe it was the way she smirked at my frustration, maybe it was the laughter of her little dog yapping behind her like it too was mocking me, or maybe it was just years of her nitpicking every tiny thing. The color of my mailbox, the placement of my trash bins, the fact that my kids left their bikes in the driveway for 10 minutes. But whatever it was, I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. And that's when the idea hit me, half as a joke and half as a dare to myself. If she wanted the hedges gone, then fine, I'd replace them, but not with new plants that she could trim down again. No, I would build something she couldn't touch, something so absurdly over the top that it would drive her insane every time she looked out her window. And that's how the plan for my cinder block fortress was born. And I spent the next week hauling block after block into my yard, stacking them higher and higher until the wall loomed over the street like the defenses of a medieval castle, neighbors gawking as they drove by, some cheering me on, others shaking their heads in disbelief, but all of them secretly delighted to see someone finally stand up to Karen. And oh, the look on her face the first time she saw it was priceless, her jaw dropping, her eyes bulging as though I had just committed the most unspeakable crime against suburban order, and she stormed across the street screaming that I couldn't do this, that it violated 10 HOA bylaws, 20 zoning ordinances, and possibly even international treaties. But I just smiled, because as it turned out, I had done my homework, and while the HOA had plenty of rules about plants, shrubs, fences, and paint colors, there was not a single word about fortresses. And when she threatened to call the police, the officer who showed up could barely keep a straight face as he informed her that technically I wasn't breaking any laws, and that maybe she should just let it go. But of course Karen never lets anything go, and that's when the real battle began, because suddenly it wasn't just about the fortress, it was about pride, about power, about who really ran the neighborhood. And she launched a campaign to rally the other HOA board members against me, painting me as a dangerous radical intent on turning our peaceful cul-de-sac into a war zone, while I doubled down and added battlements, turrets, and even a working drawbridge over my driveway, because if you're going to build a fortress, you might as well go all in, right? And what had started as petty revenge soon spiraled into full-blown neighborhood chaos, with some neighbors sneaking over at night to help me build, others spying for Karen and reporting back on my every move, and all the while, tensions rising until our quiet little community felt less like suburbia and more like a medieval kingdom on the brink of civil war. And yet even then, I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, because one evening as I was laying the last row of cinder blocks, I heard a faint metallic clang from inside the wall, and when I pried open a hollow block to investigate, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden inside was a small rusted tin box filled with old photographs, faded letters, and a key marked only with the word vault. And as I pieced together the letters, it became clear they belonged to the house's original owner decades ago, hinting at some kind of buried treasure or dark secret hidden somewhere beneath the neighborhood. And suddenly my fortress wasn't just a petty monument of defiance, it was the accidental uncovering of a mystery, one that Karen somehow already seemed to know about, because when she saw me holding the tin box, her expression shifted from outrage to pure panic, and she lunged at me demanding I hand it over, screaming that it didn't belong to me, which only confirmed that she had known about it all along. And now I realized this was bigger than HOA politics. This was about uncovering something she desperately wanted kept hidden. So of course I refused, and from that moment, Karen's attacks escalated. She started filing bogus complaints not just against me but against anyone who sided with me, fining people for ridiculous infractions, threatening legal action, and even trying to bribe a city inspector to declare my fortress a safety hazard. But the more she fought, the more the neighborhood turned against her, because everyone was sick of her reign of terror, and soon my fortress became less of a personal act of revenge and more of a symbol of resistance, the rallying point for a community tired of being pushed around. And we began hosting block parties inside its walls, stringing up lights, playing music, even projecting movies onto the cinder blocks, turning what was once a gray wall into a beacon of unity. And as Karen seethed, I quietly continued my investigation, using the mysterious key to eventually discover a hidden crawl space beneath my garage that led to an old storm shelter where I found more boxes, more documents, and, to my utter shock, evidence that Karen herself wasn't just some busybody neighbor but the granddaughter of the man who once owned half the land the neighborhood was built on, and that her obsession with controlling everything stemmed from her belief that the HOA was her inheritance, her birthright, and my fortress was not just an eyesore to her but a direct challenge to her legacy. And armed with this knowledge, I confronted her at the next HOA meeting in front of everyone, laying out the documents, exposing her lies, her corruption, and her abuse of power, and for the first time, she was speechless, cornered, her authority crumbling like the very hedges she had cut down. And though she tried to lash out one last time, threatening lawsuits and screaming about conspiracies, the board voted her out unanimously, stripping her of her title and her clipboard. And as she stomped away humiliated, the neighborhood erupted in cheers, because we had finally won. But the story didn't end there, because late one night, weeks after the dust had settled, I noticed movement at the edge of my yard, and when I went to investigate, I found a fresh cinder block missing from the fortress, and inside the gap was a note in Karen's handwriting that read only, "The vault is not what you think." And suddenly I knew the battle wasn't truly over, because while I had built my fortress to keep her out, what I had really done was build the walls of a mystery that still lingered just beyond reach, one that promised even more chaos, more secrets, and more battles to come. And though I should have been terrified, I couldn't help but smile, because if Karen thought a little warning was going to scare me, she clearly hadn't learned her lesson. And besides, once you've built a fortress, you don't back down, you prepare for whatever comes next.